I want to go over what I did at the very beginning. Chip called me and said the website was down, that something to do with the storage in the back end. So I very quickly, using a simple YAML file, there's about 30 to 40 lines with parameters in there, was able to upload that into CloudFormation, right? I was able to put that up into CloudFormation just as a new stack and deploy an instance of FSX with certain parameters around security groups and subnets. And it takes about 30 minutes to provide. I stood up a storage array in 30 minutes. Let that sink in for a minute.
I don't believe it.
Let that just, I'm serious, I dramatic pause, but really think about what that means. You're not spending the next 6 months racking and stacking gear and testing configs. You have the ability to spin one up in a very dynamic way. And I did it through CloudFormation with YAML. You can certainly just go to the main console FSX section and you can do step-by-step through it and go, I want to create a file. So there's all my file systems. I'm going to go to NetApp ONTAP. That's fine. Right? You can go through and name all of these individually if you want. This is the beauty of kind of what Adrian was referring to earlier, that we spent a lot of time over the course of 2 years making sure that it worked with native AWS tooling. CloudWatch, CloudTrail, CloudFormation just came, I think last month just came online. We've got a very robust roadmap over the next couple of years of more native services that we're going to be bringing, not to mention the NetApp ones that are going to come along, the integrations there as well. This is a big deal for anybody that's managed storage infrastructure in the past to be able to do this in an automated fashion, kind of an unattended deployment of a storage array.
If I have to, move some data from my on-premises data center, I'm already a NetApp customer, and I already have, some system installed. How can I configure a similar system in the cloud? I mean, I want something that looks similar in terms of latency and IOPS. Is it possible? So can you give me like?
You just took a big softball and you lobbed it up for me. Right. Here's what it looks like. So with all of this stuff provisioned, this is NetApp Cloud Manager. And we've got a lot of content, or I've pre-staged some things, but I intentionally wanted to show you some stuff as well. This is to what you were just talking about, Enrico. I've got an on-prem array here, right? Yep. And it's currently snap mirroring to an instance of FSX in US West 2. It's snap mirror. It's ONTAP at the end of the day, right? So regardless of what model number you have or how capable it might be, at the end of the day, it's keep it simple. It's snap mirror. So this is where the ONTAP everywhere mantra comes in. I could also do backups if I wanted to, like snap vault configuration to this FSX.
Can you configure something that is almost identical? I mean, I have an AFF 800, I don't know, or maybe something even different. So, and I want something that is not identical, but actually similar, so that when I move my workload, it looks the same. I don't want the users calling me and saying.
Well, to your point, let's say that's a scenario that you actually need to do. Let's go in here and let's actually add it because Chip was complaining. So I need to, no, that's the wrong one. Data center dude. Let's go in here and actually look at, I mean, we got to keep working with Chip's thing, right? Was this Chip's? I think that was Chip's. Oh, there's Chip. So just like that, I just imported a provisioned instance of FSX into Cloud Manager. And once it gets done, I mean, it's already loaded in there. It's just an app basically. And then I can establish a mirror or a backup or whatever relationship from any of the other CVO instances that might be running in the cloud, an on-prem array, whether it's AFF or an old FAS, or hell, an old legacy Isilon if you wanted to get rid of that thing finally, and just use Cloud Sync to move the data and establish that sync relationship. This is the first evolution of the universal control plane concept of what you were describing, bringing it all together.
Okay, so different question. I have 2 petabytes of data and I don't have a very fast connection.
Yep.
Can I snowball something to this in some way?
Adrian?
Sorry, can you what?
Snowball.
He's got 2 petabytes. He wants to snowball it and seed it into FSX.
Yeah, so Snowball's a separate service, right? Snowball is yes, if you wanted to, you had a large amount of data that you didn't want to transfer over a direct connect or a VPN connection. Yes, you can go and order a Snowball and plug that in, and using an NFS connection, you can do that. what Nick's just done there, so if you think about the rack and stack experience, we've just turned all that into code, right? And so whether you're using CloudFormation, which is our infrastructure as code service, or whether you're using the SDK, or whether you're using the CLI commands, we've just provisioned an entire highly available storage environment in an AWS region in 30 minutes, okay? Once you're there, using Cloud Manager, you can discover it, and you can do all the things that you would usually be able to do 100%. There's absolutely no compatibility indifference that you can do with ONTAP, right? And that's the hugely powerful thing. This is that hybrid crossover that Nick was talking about before. So whether you are coming from a traditional enterprise environment and you have skills and you have existing tooling that has been built around those, you can continue to use that. But also remember, if you don't come from that environment, because Nick's presentation at the start of this was all about a cloud native experience. If you know none of that, you can get all the ONTAP experiences through CloudFormation or the Amazon SDK or CLI.
All through a single dashboard, a single management plane. That is, we talk about cloud native. We're not talking cloud adjacent and cloud native. I think some vendors like to confuse, kind of conveniently blur the lines. This is the advantage of a fully cloud native first party service under a single dashboard.
That's how many lines of code it is in YAML, by the way. For people that have run infrastructure for decades, it's a game changer. The ability to do that as code, and to be able to craft that, even to Adrian's point, if you build it into SDKs and if you build it into other sorts of workflows that just call APIs, maybe you want to build an entire stack that not only provisions an instance of FSX, but it also connects it to EC2 and SageMaker and all of these other native applications inside of AWS all at the same time by leveraging that other programmatic extensibility beyond just standing up a YAML file. Like that's where this goes. That's where this starts to get to be a lot of fun.
I can appreciate the importance of being native to AWS. When I'm all in AWS, it's important for me. If AWS is my control plane of choice, then, or whatever cloud provider, if they're my control plane of choice, then it's important that the service is central. If we're thinking multi-cloud, hybrid infrastructure, and I'm thinking, my control plane, it maybe doesn't matter as much that if it's cloud adjacent or not. The question is, how do I do what was just described? Because that's now, while it's a great engineering feat, it's the expectation. Like it's table stakes. It's table stakes that I can provision multi-region replication with a few keystrokes versus months and months of provisioning, et cetera.
Sure, but natively within each cloud provider. I've got on-prem, AWS, Azure, and I could throw up a Google instance if you want to. Show me one place right now where you could do that outside of the cloud provider's native stuff.
So again,
there's not. It doesn't exist. That's the thing.
If I have to deal with 3 different cloud providers' control planes, if I have an adjacent, if NetApp is my part and they have 3 adjacent, if they have their cloud adjacent, and I have to deal with the NetApp control plane and the 3 different cloud providers' control plane,
that's not how this is happening, though.
Yeah.
I know that's not how this is happening.
But it's also unrealistic to expect that. You might have different groups within a company or different lines of business that have a preference for Google Cloud over AWS, but within that, you're not going to see a lot. Where multi-cloud comes into play most often is with managed services. Some people might be using Office 365. People might prefer using Google Drive. That's still in a way considered multi-cloud for me if they're using things like that. But I don't find that a lot of companies outside of backup and recovery are really building outside of the native control planes of the cloud provider that they choose. And that's often driven by financial incentives that they have to stay within. They make exclusive deals, whether that's they have an EA with Microsoft or they've got a pricing deal with AWS, a commit and things like that for discount. All of that stuff comes into play as well. It's not just about whether you can. At the end of the day, it really comes down, usually it's a financial decision that you're getting benefit out of.
So that financial decision, let's walk down that path. The IDC has a stat, 88% of enterprises want that ability to put their workloads back on-prem after they get to a level of maturity in the public cloud. At that point, my control plane is no longer AWS focused. It's part of my control plane. It's not the control plane. So again, cloud adjacency is not a bad word in that sense if I'm not all in AWS.
Well, can you think about this in terms of security? Adrian mentioned identity management and other features that you get from a public cloud service, particularly AWS, and that think about cloud adjacent in that respect. How do you manage data, the resources, compliance, security, identity, all?
If I'm hybrid, I'm going to have that problem regardless.
But
I'm either all AWS or not.
I got to take issue with what you just said, Greg, because I'll
Yeah,
tell you,
that's
most
the
enterprises do not
transcendent
want to get all in with one cloud provider that holds them hostage. when
Oh,
something-
no, you're missing. I'm not saying,
But-
Adrian,
but-
you want to speak
Yeah,
to
no.
the-
So let's get reoriented back to the workload, because that's what we are seeing customers fundamentally making decisions on. Almost always, when the application comes across, the data layer needs to be very close to it, right? We're not splitting it across different cloud planes. We're not splitting it across different network connections. Those things are coming along together. So back to where NetApp's strength has been in enterprise, whether it's bringing across an Oracle workload, an SAP workload, a Microsoft workload, customers are making their migration decisions on bringing the workload across, okay? Now, if they want to start splitting their workloads based on their business units or their geographical proximity, fine, I get that use case. But I think the real power of this, and again, what this fundamentally does is it removes the friction associated with mission critical workload migration.
Can I show you a perfect segue? I'm going to finish Chip's thing request real quick. They said he couldn't get to the website, so I'm just going to drag and drop the on-prem array on top of the FSX instance. Hopefully I didn't set that before. Okay, well, I screwed up. I have to go set the password on the AWS. The point is I can drag and drop and really quickly create a replication just like this one right here from on-prem to FSX.
This is where my question was before on this. From
And
a
that's where
functionality
he's
perspective.
going, right?
Yeah, I have a functionality question.
So the whole point of doing this is that while you might have individual groups that are going to want to operate, whether it's fanboyism or whether it's pricing incentivization or whatever it is, at some point, somebody's going to need to manage the data across all of the different ones. What Cloud Manager gives you is about as close as you can get to that unicorns and rainbows, universal control plane, single pane of glass that we all really hope that one day we will achieve. But at the end of the day, it's about managing the infrastructure side of it. Sit this right beside Spot as a control plane for your applications and provisioning compute, and you're going to have a really good time, because you're going to have teams that want to build and code applications but want nothing to do with any of this stuff. And you're going to have infrastructure teams that want to build and manage infrastructure and data and manage data, backups, replication, all of that, storage efficiencies, things like stuff that no one loves. They want nothing to do with writing code and deploying applications in Kubernetes, right? Putting them all together in some crazy universal control plane, it's not out of the realm of possibility, but we could, it's something we're investigating. But right now you're going to have the segregation between infrastructure and line of business app owners, and having two different places to manage all of those across on-prem and cloud have different requirements and are going to be done differently.
So governance. The question I have about the Cloud Manager specifically, you're able to move and create replicas from here to there. Are there any guardrails built in, maybe tied in with DataSense or one of these other products that can help you or prevent people from taking data? Let's say you got an application that's, and I see this quite frankly, even from just US and Canada, right?
Sure.
So Canadian organizations don't want to see personal information get over the border of the United States. So are there guardrails to prevent you from saying, okay, I'm going to replicate, I'm going to go to US East 1. Oh, no, you can't do that. It shouldn't even show up as one of those replicas. So maybe you have something like that?
Guardrails, no, but alerts, yes. Meaning that if we detect something, we're going to tell you about it.
Okay.
And I'm pulling up right now what I told you I would pull up and show you guys what Cloud Data Sense actually looks like. This is all dummy data, by the way, nothing's real, but I wanted you to see that we have the ability to go in and inspect at a very granular level all kinds of different stuff that's in there. So if you have a policy it's an if then else sort of kind of policy driven sort of thing. If you want to build those guardrails and something gets detected, we're going to be like, hey, we found this, whether it's an unmasked social security number in a database table, or whether it's data in Canada that you don't want to be in a particular region, like all of that can be built in with policy.
They can go, like you can use tags and stuff maybe? Can you tag?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love this question because this is a great education moment. When Nick and I were probably in our 20s still building data centers in the physical world, we thought about perimeter security, right? Because that's how fundamentally we designed back then.
Two-factor was a security guard and a badge scan.
There you go. But this is a fundamental difference in the cloud. When we think about governance, when we think about regulation, it is not something you just do at the outer bounds of your infrastructure or the outer bounds of your applications. It's done in every single layer. So let me actually talk to you specifically how that's done in the cloud, right? So, Nick talked about the foundations when you set up a VPC or your security groups. That's already one boundary, right? But if we go even further down, I talked about the identity and access control, IAM. Right? This gives you fine-grained control over who has access to that service, to those volumes, right? And you can build policies with IAM that is built into FSXN that allows you to say, hey, I only want this identity profile to access this service even in a time-bound way. I only want them to have access to it from 6 p.m. until 9 p.m. because that's all they ever needed to do the backup.
Or he can only provision in a particular.
And this is all fantastic, but what I deal with mostly, like if I'm all 100% in AWS, wonderful, that all works. Most of the environments I see are going to be regional or global hybrid multi-cloud environments where it's almost an impossibility.
But are those applications?
So there's no answer. I'm not saying it's the right answer.
No, I'd like to challenge that because I'd love to, we don't typically see at the workload level, at the application level that customers are doing that. Across workloads, yes. But, again, centering on the mission critical application, what we continue to see is that customers are making decisions for that application on a set of controls, on a set of products. It's not just the cloud provider, but all the surroundings software. So, it's important to get that nuance in what hybrid cloud is, because again, we are not necessarily seeing customers saying, I want that SAP workload to run in 3 different cloud providers with 17 different, controls. They're certainly making those decisions potentially on different types of applications, but not necessarily for the same.
And that was the distinction I was making before, as far as where your identity management, security, and other things. It is very much application focused, just like it is for on-premises infrastructure. So that's what we were talking about, the services, the cloud native versus cloud adjacent services. If you think about how cloud adjacent kind of complicates and adds layers of complication to security profiles and identity management that you wouldn't have here. But if we're just thinking in terms of, and you brought up a good question, but I think Adrian clarified that it really is by the workload.
I mean, I do see workloads. So I do see clients that have workloads, and use SAP as a good example. I do have clients that are running SAP in multiple clouds. And I do have, and I do have clients that are running Oracle in Oracle Cloud and on-prem, and maybe some other platforms. So, I see some of that stuff. So I would imagine that it would be a good decision for a client, perhaps, to do what you're talking about and keep your workloads in a homogeneous plane of control.
I certainly see that it may be running the same applications, but the workload may be very specific. I mean, you asked about tagging, right?
Yeah.
One of the single best features that AWS released, I think it was back in 2015 or 16, was tagging, because now you can tag all your resources that you run, whether it's a file system, whether it's a network address translation gateway, whether it's a direct connect connection, you're able to tag all of that. So that level of granularity has been the nirvana of the stuff that we used to do. Remember the chargeback days, right?
Page 2 of the FSX file system creation.
Tags right there.
Tags.
Yeah.
So name, region specific, maybe an IAM who has access to it, tag.
Well, even better, probably your API can allow my other tool to tag that, right, as well.
Absolutely.
Right, so you can integrate it all.
Yeah.
It's more, probably what my client.
Tags are amazing. If you're not using tags yet, it's the amount of things that it enables you to do from a data inspection thing and finding out where all your stuff is. Okay, especially when you have different cloud providers with different UIs and different naming conventions and different interface names, all of this stuff. If you can standardize your tagging structure first internally and then put that stuff everywhere, and you don't have to care
That's the secret
what
sauce.
they're,
If I could just jump in, Chris, you did a podcast. I think the date was December 24th, just because it was the day before Christmas. I'm like, who does a podcast the day before Christmas? But you and Martin were talking about FSX and some of the announcements that you saw coming out of reInvent. But you guys also had some additional questions you were looking for answers. I wanted to give you a moment to share what those questions were. Maybe between Adrian and Nick, we can get those.
We were talking about things like exactly what the implementation would look like. We were talking about things like why it still has to be an SVM, why, and we've talked about this before, by the way, why it couldn't just be exposing a file share, why we have to still think of it in the sort of mechanical terms. We were talking about whether you'd export block as well as file and whether you'd see the opportunity to use multiple protocols. And then I think we also discussed, which is probably a bit more contentious, about whether the development of all of these file services are becoming an evolution of file services, and some of them might die. For example, the Windows solution is now superseded by the fact that NetApp can offer both SMB and NFS. So why bother with the Windows one anymore? So are some going to die off because they're now, end of life in terms of they're being superseded? And is there a policy to try and create more and more file systems simply because you see more and more use cases? Or is it because, sorry to make it such a long question, is it because the underlying support of the platform requires you to build in multiple platforms because without it, you couldn't get things like the benefit of SnapMirror and other sorts of technologies?
Yeah,
Sorry,
let me start by having a go. I mean, we're not going to hide the fact that there are still SVMs, right? It's the same argument for serverless. Just because it's called serverless, does it mean that there is really no service?
I promise there's a CPU somewhere.
There is, absolutely there is. But the point is that we're hiding a lot of the abstraction, okay? In the days of on-premise infrastructure, you had to care a lot more about the SVM. You had to manage the SVM. You had to make sure it was available, right? The difference is that now as a fully managed PaaS service, the end customer doesn't have to worry about that anymore, right? Why they need to know is because architects are still making decisions on throughput, right? Again, if you look at the way FSXN is actually delivered, you need to make fundamental decisions on the capacity of it, the capacity pools, the throughput, right? And we've got those ratios that we work with underneath. The point is, though, is that I'm not managing the availability, the accessibility of those things, but they are still fundamental constructs that are required to be able to deliver the performance and availability of the service.
Okay, but I could argue the point that that's an architectural design around the way that ONTAP was built in the first place, and that ONTAP itself wasn't necessarily built to be as scalable and as dynamic and to be put onto flexible infrastructures and changed over time. For instance, to have a situation where I can now add CPUs into whatever entity, because we don't know the implementation detail, to add extra CPUs into that environment dynamically and say, this SVM or this entity running it now doesn't have enough capacity, rather than have to say, oh, I've got to move it or rebuild it or move that data, to just be able to say, well, I'll just add on 4 new processes in there and carry on. Because that's what you do in the old days.
SVMs and clustered ONTAP has really only been around for like 8 years now. So the whole SVM concept really goes back to pre-clustered ONTAP and what we used to call SMT, or secure multi-tenancy. That's really all it is at the end of the day. When you think architecturally, when you think about it, it's a way for you to segment your environment without having to spin up additional complete resources, right? You have the ability to kind of abstract away some of that and put up some walls around. You can have Coke and Pepsi in the same one if you wanted to, right? So as an example. So
again, if you go to the product page and the architectural guidance that we give, we don't talk about SVMs because it's inconsequential to the design. The sort of things that we want designers to, it's an engineering. We care about it because we're the engineers and we're the ones delivering the service. But what you see is we want the architects, the customers thinking about what sort of throughput, what provision throughput is required for that application.
Too many customers skip from, ooh, that looks cool, to deploying.
Right.
They skip the step of, man, I should really take some time and design this thing. the way that actually, and they don't get on the whiteboard and war room and debate internally anymore. They go
Yeah, well-
straight to just deploying stuff. And then it ends up as a full circle thing where they end up having to come back and re-provision stuff to re-architect it because they didn't take into account things like SVMs and segmentation and things. Do the work and it makes sense, right?
But you've had QoS in the platform for a long time.
Of course.
So why not just leverage the QoS feature and allow somebody to change the stuff that they want dynamically using the QoS feature that's in the
Because we want it to be predictable, right? Now, think about the evolution that we've come along, right? Nick talked about the fact that you could still run. If you wanted, you could still go and run ONTAP on an EC2. You want that fine-grained control and you want to run infrastructure yourself, go ahead, knock yourself out. You can still do that.
Yep.
But what we're finding is that if we can give that predictable level of availability, of performance, of latency, that is what really end customers care about. And that's why we kind of yes, we are changing some of that terminology. It's going to take a little bit of reorientation for someone who just comes from a storage and NetApp world to understand, okay, now I need to think about throughput and capacity pools, and the terminology is a little bit different. But I'm no longer, I still have the same kind of decisions that I need to make, but I'm not having to manage those elements. I'm more worried now about how I might want to automate it. Yeah. Do I want to start turning it into infrastructure as code so that when I'm deploying my SAP workload, that I can stick it all in a cloud formation template and run it in US West in the space of a couple of hours? Now that's a far more, conducive decision, I think, for management to want to hear. Is not like, well, I need to fine tune, these elements of ONTAP. That's all gone, right?
And you could potentially spend weeks or months fine tuning that template to get it to where it all deploys successfully. You have IAM roles underneath that allow it. You've got your security groups and subnets all lined up. Like that takes effort. That takes a lot of time and work to get right. But once you do, the ability to field phone calls from Chip and just upload a YAML file and go, yeah, all right, fine. Here's another one in East 1. Just leave me alone.
Let's address some of the stuff that was discussed earlier that sort of Keith touched on.
Yep.
If I'm not in the slightest bit interested about being a storage administrator, which nowadays who would,
Right.
But that was last year. That was the last decade. But now I'm a developer, and all I want is I just want a file share.
Yeah.
I don't know. You've demonstrated lots of things today, but I'm not sure I've seen it to that level where you've just said, I'm a developer. Like I want an S3 bucket. I can just go in and say S3 bucket done. So I do file share done.
So once your file system's deployed, you go to the tab underneath it, go to volumes, and you create volume, and you give it a name. That's right. The floor. Right?
But how is the internal customer making that happen for the development team?
Oh, sure, CloudFormation. You can do CloudFormation.
No, but I mean, in a operational sense, are you seeing people saying that there's centralized teams saying, here's the
I see what you're saying. The big way this is being consumed on the internal enterprise
Yeah.
is that we see a lot of like SDK use built into internal self-service platforms
Right.
for the biggest customers. Like they're not exposing the AWS, they're not giving their end users an IAM role and dropping them into AWS. They're using internal self-service ticketing systems that kick off something that goes and provisions their resource and lets them know when it's.
So Chris, once that's provisioned, so let's talk about all the different ways you can consume it.
Yeah.
Right. So you can expose it to an Amazon EC2 instance. Okay. You can expose it through a direct connect or a VPN connection if you want to expose it externally. You can expose it to any of the AWS container services, ECS, EKS, Fargate. You can also expose it to the managed desktop services like Amazon Workspaces or AppStream. Right. And this is what is so exciting about it is NetApp have just talked about ONTAP everywhere. And so if you are in the cloud world, which is increasingly happening, let's all face it, this is the reality. The flock of birds are flying very, very fast now, and they're much bigger than they ever have been before. The ability to be able to have all that level of traditional control that the enterprise has known and loved to all those different ways means that you can accelerate far faster than ever before all those workloads.
I think it'd be nice if we saw a demonstration, a presentation, which showed the view from the developer in that sense, where we don't talk about it from a storage perspective or this is how we used to do it in the old world. We show how a developer just comes along and says, well, I need some storage. Bang, API, done, runs their application, destroys it, moves on. That would be a really good way to focus the discussion rather than coming at it from we've moved the technology.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I mean, again, we don't want to hide the fact that we are today trying to address the final friction points that we see for enterprise. Right? We are, as I mentioned, the large scale enterprise workloads, we are seeing all those regulated industries bringing their workloads into the cloud. And this removes these frictions. But I think Nick started to touch on this is whether it's through a YAML file in CloudFormation or an SDK. Again, developers talk SDK. So the ability to be able to consume this inside a code, inside of an SDK is extremely powerful. To be able to provision that persistent storage inside an EKS cluster or a pod, right? It's using all those familiar developer constructs. And then if you still want to go and use the native tools from ONTAP, guess what? You could still go do that.
You remember when you would deploy Microsoft apps, 10, 15 years ago, and at a certain point around the 2007 timeframe, they would give you the PowerShell string. Mm-hmm. That was the equivalent of what the wizard would run. You do the exact same thing in Cloud Manager. When you get to the end of the wizard, there's a thing in the top right that says show API requests. You can grab that code snippet, hand it to your developers, and basically provision anything you want to. The beauty of doing it in Cloud Manager versus one particular cloud provider is that you can do that same stuff across all three in a unified way with that single central API.
Which is great. And I think from a story perspective for our discussion today, seeing some of that developer type approach to this would be useful. Maybe that's another angle for another day.
Like good feedback.
Yeah, that's an area that I think getting into some of those details of how it works for a particular group, that's sort of what, like the capabilities were there. It's like it can do these things, but it's still a little bit abstract for me. So I think what I wanted to see maybe a bit more of is that thing of like, this is how a developer would use this, or this is how the traditional admin would use that, because you're also simultaneously transitioning from NetApp as a storage company to NetApp as a cloud company.
Sure.
So that will help me orient. Like am I new to NetApp and I'm experiencing this for the first time? Don't worry, you don't have to learn how to drive ONTAP. You can consume this in the cloud way. Here's what that looks like. Or you're a traditional admin. Here's how you can encourage people to move to doing it the new way instead of being stuck doing it as an old storage admin. That's that sort of dot connection I wasn't quite there with. These examples here has really helped with that.
Yeah. The best thing, thank you for that, Justin. And it's something that's on my list to make sure that I give a kind of a full guided tour from the two different perspectives of the two different. So whether you're an infrastructure admin that's familiar with ONTAP or a cloud architect that's never heard of ONTAP, the beauty of Cloud Manager, what you're seeing on the screen here, is that we don't use the word ONTAP. We use things like working environment, right? So you can create a working environment for any of the three cloud providers. And when you select one of them, you can deploy single node or HA instances of CVO. You can deploy a Kubernetes cluster and attach persistent storage to it, or you can deploy FSX for ONTAP completely agnostically, regardless of what your experience is with ONTAP and NetApp previously.
Yeah, and what Warren touched on is what I was going to say as well, which is, being real crisp about who the audience is, because cloud is really difficult because you're not always talking just to the infrastructure team.
Yeah.
And as an infrastructure company coming in, you're used to talking to those people, but you're not used to talking to developers. But developers still have a very big play, and the financial people still have a really big play. And you've got all these different constituencies that you have to deal with across the organization that, having been in sales, you're not always just looking at the technical decision maker or the financial decision maker anymore. You've got to convince 4 different decision makers and get them all on board.
You've got to get the DevOps team to talk to you at all.
Yeah, and then you start throwing in
the infrastructure guys are over there. Leave us alone.
Yeah, and enterprise to a mid-market is going to be a very different dynamic as well. So I would agree. I would think that was the piece that was really missing is what are the use cases? Who are you talking to, and what are they going to get out of it?
There's going to be the infrastructure focused folks There's going to be the kind of middle of the tier. They might be moving into SRE, but they're still going to be familiar with at least cloud infrastructure. And then there's the cloud native, just app developer types, right? And we have tools and products that kind of address all of those.
Gartner has a stat that, and there's different stats from different folks, between 50 or 75% of all data is going to be created and stay at the edge and never make its way back to core cloud, right? So now, obviously, I mean, we're seeing as 5G starts to develop and mature, and finally, we start to see some stuff there. And we're seeing a lot of edge applications, multi-regional edge applications. I see Astra as a huge benefit there. Obviously, we're already seeing Outpost, the new Outpost types going on to third-party bare metal.
You asked me recently what we were doing at the edge. I'm
Yeah,
excited today to show you guys Data Store finally now that it's in preview.
Yeah, so is
That's
that
going to be a huge play? And I would dispute 55% of data is going to stay at the edge. I don't know that I agree with that. Like if you use Chick-fil-A, for example, they're one of the biggest like cases out there that have like edge stuff. They're just putting nooks into something and shipping it all back up to the cloud. I don't know.
Well, it might be roll-up data coming out. I mean, it depends. When you're collecting a lot of IoT data and raw data, people like to collect and save everything.
Sure, but you're not modeling that at the
yeah. I'm not here to dispute Gartner and whoever else's numbers, right? But and they've said it 2 years in a row, so I don't know. They're just surveying people. But my point is that obviously storage at the edge is going to be a thing, one way or the other, right? That's indisputable.
For real-time compute, absolutely.
For real-time compute, inference at the edge or whatever. And even there's federated AI, there'll be some training at the edge.
Face recognition,
all sorts
retail, all of that stuff is going to matter.
Yep, and local video. Storage. So I guess my point is that, there's been ONTAP Select for a long time that you could run on bare metal or on VMs somewhere, right? You've got FSX. Will FSX, first of all, run on Outpost?
Possibly. I'm not planning to make any announcements today.
Okay, so today it does not.
Confirm or deny.
Let's be really clear. We're not talking about futures at all.
Adrian is not the product
today. It does not.
For FSX.
It's off, right? 95% of the stuff that he's demonstrated here are things that are on the truck today.
Or
we want to tread carefully when we talk about.
No, I don't want to know about the future. I'm saying that today, FSX is not running on Outpost. Okay, so today, once Astra gets out of preview, it's in preview. That would probably be the choice of storage at the edge today.
Astra, the control plane aspect of it is available.
Data store.
The data store part is in private preview right now.
Okay.
Yeah. But once you get that, and the ideal scenario is you've got a managed Astra control service where you simply point at your Kubernetes clusters and either deploy a data store instance to wherever you would like that to live and back up and clone that to, I don't know, EKS.
Yeah, or you could throw out FSX, Select and use Trident and use Astra Control to go to Select.
But let's actually double. I think this is great. I think let's actually double click on this, all right? Because let's think about how much easier that is, right? Now, a product like AWS Outpost, what that does is it not only just brings all that compute and storage that you need out to the edge, it helps you not provision it and manage it, right? That's the real benefit, and this is how AWS certainly sees, the hybrid cloud playing out. Now, whether it's a dedicated outpost or a local zone or an AWS region, right? Think about these data stores, and I think this is where the NetApp story really does come together, is whether you want to deploy FSXN in an AWS region, or whether you want to run eventually Astra on an outpost or in a local zone or in a Kubernetes cluster, which you can do today, mind you. Yeah. When you start using Cloud Manager to be able to move that data around, because remember, that data has to reside at the edge for things like inference, for fast, low latency inference. But I may want to do analytics with that same data. So the ability to be able to transport that across any type of edge back into an AWS region and then pull that in, with an EMR or Spark job to be able to do analytics. Think about the power of that. And then layer on top of everything that we just talked about, it being able to be provisioned through CloudFormation or YAML. That's an extreme level of automation that has not been possible before. And it's through our respective tool sets that we're enabling customers to do that.
I have a question on how you're able to do that. Take a step back for a second. I'm not overly exposed to NetApp. ONTAP, SnapMare, they're meaningful.
Well, come right up here. We'll get you to provision a volume.
You're exactly the
Maybe next
customers
week.
that I love
Yeah.
talking to because the light bulb, you can see it when it happens, when they get that it clicks. But,
I'm trying to picture this in my head. So it is that you've containerized the controller aspect of an array and separated the disks out, because you said there you could scale performance independently from storage.
Yes.
So is this disks over, NVMe over Fabric being presented to containers to let you scale that out, and then ONTAP is layered on top, and that's giving you all your SnapMare functionality, etc.
So we don't go into exactly how it's built, right? You can probably imagine the type of primitives that we're using on the platform. The things that we want our customers to worry about, and frankly, what they tell us what they want to worry about, is I care about how much storage I need, how much provision capacity I have, what throughput, what latency.
How much cost?
And what cost, right?
I understand you're attaching policies to it to achieve those goals. But when you say you can scale out performance, how far can you scale that out? And you can scale out capacity. How far can you scale that?
Yeah. So for example, with capacity, we can go right out to 256 terabytes, per instance, per file system.
For instance.
Yep.
Right.
Then again, you can go and see the product page for all of this. It's sub-millisecond, latency or response time.
Okay.
So, and there is a cost associated, for those IOP blocks.
Mm-hmm.
So all the design inputs are all published in the service. Now, again, the beauty of a service like this is, well, it's the cloud. You can go and provision as many of these as you like within those predefined boundaries.
So it's almost like they're independently functioning pods attached to.
You can imagine in the back end, of course it is. It's
But it's
but you
important
can layer all
to,
that on top functionality.
it's important not to get wrapped up in that, because people want to start judging the individual components under the covers, right? And it takes away from the abstraction of it not having to care about it, right?
And let's be candid, developers don't care about it.
How, if you know how it works, you'll know its capabilities better.
Another reason, and sorry, I'm going to draw a quick parallel here to S3. Right? S3 is a service that's actually been around for 15 years. Do you think it's still running all the same kind of servers and software that it did when it first did? No, it doesn't. It's completely transparent. It's gone through generations of different hardware and software and backplanes. And that's really the benefit that a service like this is going to have, is regardless of what it's actually sitting on in the back end, a customer continues to enjoy the same way to design it and provisioning it. In fact, it will get better. You would continue to expect that the latency will drop, the provisioned IOPS will increase.
The architect in me appreciates that high level approach, capabilities. The engineer in me wants
and we give them that.
Yeah.
And we give them that.
I'm going to put the high sign here, because we do have to wrap up. We've got 1 minute and 20 seconds left. So good question. Let's take it offline.
While you guys were talking, I went and created a mirror between an on-prem array and Chip's instance of FSX from the beginning, without ever touching anything. And that's the point.
It does look great.
Right. So the ability to just do a next finish with a couple of parameters and set some things, and what do you want it to mirror, or do you want it to back up? That's the stuff that